Good to see you up there, Mr. President. I rise to add a little context to this conversation. I think it's very interesting that we just heard from two of my colleagues, Senator Kissel and Senator Gaston, and I want to remark a little bit about both of what they had to say, because I found myself agreeing with both of their comments, but there's a little more to the story, I think. Senator Kissel very aptly pointed out that we're not talking about women, we're not talking about adults, we're talking about children, and what their ability is to make complex decisions, particularly when it comes to their own health care. And we heard Senator Gaston talk about individual rights and bodily autonomy. And all of these things are very, very important, and they're very important to me. Let me address the first point, which is about who we're talking about, which is in the case of children. I just got up within the hour to talk about a previous bill that was going through the Transportation Committee that ended up here that raises the age for when you're required to wear a motorcycle helmet from 18 to 21. And I made the point that in America and in Connecticut, largely, we agree that the age of majority is 18. So when you're 18, you get to make your own decisions. Prior to that, your parents have a lot to say about what you do. And as was pointed out, there's a lot of times that there's legislation passed with the argument being that someone's ability to make a strong decision is not reached until they're older. Sometimes we hear people say that, if you commit a crime in your early 20s, it's because your brain isn't fully developed, that kind of thing. And I just want to make sure that we are understanding that we can't have it both ways all the time. We should try and find a specific, and frankly, I don't even care whether it's 18 or 21 or we pick a different number, but we ought to have a number where people are actually responsible for themselves and consider that a true majority age. I think the federal government kind of threw us a curveball way back when with alcohol, and I think that kind of complicated issues because prior to that, I think 18 was it. You could serve in the military. Pretty much you could do almost anything at age 18. When they changed the age to buy alcohol at 21, I think that kind of opened the door to a lot of other things changing as well. As far as the issue goes, comparing the rights of individuals and bodily autonomy, no one is more of a libertarian when it comes to let's fight for individual rights versus the state than me. But what I want to point out in this particular case is that we're not deciding between the child making a decision or a parent making a decision. What we're doing is we're deciding between a parent being involved in the decision-making process or the state being involved in the decision-making process. That's what we're doing here. And even the state agrees that the child should have some sort of input from a parent or guardian or other person. I'm looking at a statute that's on the books now. It's section 19A-601, information and counseling for minors required in our state law as an acknowledgement that we do want to have parents involved. It says right under section 5 that one of the requirements is that the physician or counselor shall discuss the possibility of involving the minor's parents, guardian, or other adult family members in the minor's decision-making concerning the pregnancy and whether the minor believes that involvement would be in the minor's best interest. So that's right there. So we are acknowledging that already in our state law. And in fact, it goes so far to say that the minor has to sign a document that says that they've discussed this. So we're actually going through the trouble of making sure that we put in our state law that it's a good idea for a minor to talk to an adult. In my view, the decision is not, well, if you are for parental consent or notification, you're restricting the child's rights. I think what you're doing is you're saying that I think it's the parent that ought to be the one having this conversation with the child. Instead, the alternative is the state has the conversation with the child. And for me, that's no contest. For me, it's always that the parent has a greater obligation. I'll point out also that in other states, they resolve this in a much more intelligent way, which is to say parental notification is required because you're talking about a minor child. You could be talking not just about somebody 17, but 16, 15, 14, 13. Think about that for a second, making a decision like this. So for me, I do believe they need help and insight. In other states, what they do is they put a provision right in their law that says parental notification is required, but with a big but there that says, look, if it's going to be a problem because the parent's going to discipline the child, they're going to get thrown out of the house, God knows what the story is, we have a mechanism that allows the child to go and circumvent that through probate court. And every year, I put a bill in this legislature. It never goes anywhere, but it is a parental notification requirement with this carve-out to say that's the mechanism that says, look, the state can have a role to play, but only after we've determined the parent is not the best choice. What we're doing here is we're suggesting that the parents have no right, let alone obligation, to guide their own child. That's the concern that I have with this bill. I'm kind of speaking in general terms, but I want to get to the actual language of the bill that is before us. So this bill, from what I can tell, and the way it's been described by the proponents, is that it is allowing a minor child to consent to prenatal care, as well as the things that the state law already allows, including termination of a pregnancy. I also noticed that it appears that it also allows that minor child to consent to contraceptive treatment without consent from the parents. I just want to confirm that's correct through Mr. President. Can I do that?
Sure can. Senator Anwar.
Thank you. Oh, I didn't realize there was a question. Would my esteemed senator repeat the question?
Will you repeat the question, Senator Sampson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I thought you were intently listening to every word, Senator. Apparently I was mistaken, and I apologize. I'm asking if the bill that's before us not only conveys the ability for a minor child to consent to prenatal care, but also to contraceptive treatment. In other words, to make a decision with their doctor about medication that is distributed that might require, under current law, the consent of a parent. Through you.
Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, correct.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I appreciate that. Is there a reason why we feel that is necessary in addition to what already exists in law, which includes the termination of pregnancy, and now with this bill would include prenatal care? I can understand making decisions about those heavy things, but now birth control is a whole separate situation. Now this is, talking about finding ways to actively avoid a pregnancy. And I certainly would hope that parents are discussing these things with their children. So why is it the state is putting forward a bill that effectively would eliminate the need for a parent to be involved in that conversation with their children? What's the connection? Through you.
Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is something that I had spoken of earlier. I will repeat some of the parts of my conversation that I had earlier as I brought out the bill. There is this whole effort around this building that we are trying to look at how could we reduce abortions, and that's been part of the conversation. But every time the conversation starts, how come we are not working on contraception? And why aren't we increasing the access to contraception? And this is what this bill does, is it's increasing the access to contraception. And also, if a child or a woman, whoever and however you may define it, is interested to have a baby, they would get prenatal care and they would get all the treatments that are necessary for that child to be born. And that's what this bill does. But we also know from the data, the probability of getting the contraception, should a parent be required to be part of it, reduces by half. That means a lot more unwanted pregnancies would happen. So this is a very common sense rationale for this, which is data driven as well. Through you, Mr. President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I appreciate that answer. And it's kind of the answer that I would expect, which is, we're the state, we know better. That's kind of the answer that we got. And I mean, no offense to my colleague, but that's kind of the answer that I got, which is that apparently parents are standing in the way of their children obtaining contraception. And somehow that's a problem for the state. Somehow the state thinks that that's a problem, that parents don't know how to raise their children, don't know how to interact with them about making these decisions. And therefore, the state has to step in and interfere by providing the ability for a child to consent to get birth control, even though the same people argue on a regular basis that when they commit some terrible act or steal a car when they're 23 years old, that they didn't know any better. In my view, that's absurd. But maybe that's just my opinion. I'm looking at this bill, Madam President, I see you up there. I'm looking at the bill that is before us, and I'm noticing that the definition that is on the front page regarding services, it says, in quotes, services, examination, or treatment related to pregnancy and pregnancy prevention is all in quotes, and then it goes ahead and includes the items that we've been talking about, which is pregnancy, counseling and services, prenatal care, and so on. But later on in the bill, I noticed that in Section B, it says any minor child may give consent for that exact same wording, those words, service, examination, or treatment related to pregnancy and pregnancy prevention. But then in Section C, it says, no physician or other healthcare provider shall divulge any information concerning the provision to a minor child of such services, examination, or treatment. And the sentence ends there. And I'm curious to why that is. Is this intentional to expand the amount of information that the physician or other healthcare provider can effectively refuse to divulge concerning a minor child? Through you.
Thank you, Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, it speaks to the services that have been listed. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate you saying that, except I find it interesting that they bothered to, in drafting this bill, include the full, in quotes, sentence in Section B about when the minor child can give consent. It seems to me if we were talking about the same thing in Section C, it would have the same information that's within those quotes. But it's not. In fact, it says only such services, examination, or treatment. So that would lead me to believe that that goes beyond services, examination, or treatment related to pregnancy and pregnancy prevention. Can you just confirm for me, through you, Madam President, that that is not the intent, that the intent of this language is solely to include services, examination, or treatment related to pregnancy and pregnancy prevention in Section C, despite the fact that it only says services, examination, or treatment? Through you.
Thank you, Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate this question. The answer is correct. It is the actual description is what it's intended for in Section B, and also the definition of the services. It does not go beyond that. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we had that on the record. I do believe it's something that ought to be corrected, and if there's a mechanism for that to happen, I do believe it should. Simply because I would hate to see something included as part of this subsection C of the bill, going forward that was not intended. And that's all my questions that I have for the good senator, so I will let him sit down. And I just have a few more words to say here, really, which is that this issue gets very confusing and very quickly because we have a bunch of different concepts we're dealing with. We're dealing, number one, with consent, and we're also dealing with notification. Some states actually require consent before any medical treatment is involving a minor child. And in fact, the state of Connecticut requires consent for most medical procedures involving a minor child. In fact, if your child is going to go and have their appendix out, or they're going to have some other type of surgery, whether it's even relatively minor surgeries, they probably have to provide consent to the doctor. Yet, over time, there's been things carved out of that statute, including the notion of terminating a pregnancy, because the forces at work in the state of Connecticut seem to believe that that is a specific type of surgery where the state should have the ability to intervene where a parent normally would, to have a conversation with the child about whether or not that's the wisest choice for them. And today, we are now adding to that list of things that we're going to grant a child, a minor child, a 13 or 14-year-old, potentially, the ability to consent to include whether or not they're going to have contraception, that's the word I was looking for, birth control. Think about that for a second. The state of Connecticut today, right here, is going to debate and vote on this bill that would allow a 13-year-old child to go and obtain birth control through a medical provider that would normally be prescribed, that normally would require consent of a parent without that parent's consent. That's what's going to happen. It's a big deal, I think. I think that's something that's worthy of note. And I feel like it's only been glossed over in this conversation. It seems to have been turned around to focus only on whether or not someone's getting the proper pain-killing treatment in the event of an actual birth, which, to my knowledge, they're already receiving. Through you, Madam President, I lied. I have another question. I apologize for the good proponent of the bill. Currently, today, right now, through you, Madam President, if a minor child is giving birth in a hospital, would that person be eligible to receive an epidural for pain management, or would the lack of this legislation before us prohibit that from happening? Through you.
Thank you. Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate this question, Madam President, because this is one very important part of this reason for the bill. Besides the access to contraception, despite the fact that there is very clear evidence that when parental consent is required, the number of the individuals seeking contraceptives decreases significantly. That's one part of the reason, but another part of the reason for this bill is critical because there have been multiple cases. We recently had conversation with many members of the OBGYN services and physicians who have mentioned that the minor does not have the right to ask for pain medications, does not have the right to epidural. And many of the cases, they have seen situations, not one, not two, but multiple on a very regular basis. They are not receiving that pain control, and that's why this legislation, once passes, is going to be able to address that. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate that answer, although I didn't get kind of the answer I was looking for, because it was kind of like, well, we've heard anecdotal reports that sometimes the minor child doesn't have the right to ask for this medication. I would just like an unequivocal answer. When a child goes and has a pregnancy and they're giving birth in a hospital right now as a minor, does the hospital say, no, we're not giving you an epidural, or they do it for sure, or it's sometimes, and if we do know, do we have data that says it happens 70% of the time or 10% of the time? Through you?
Thank you, Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the clarification and opportunity to clarify this. The reason I did not mention in a very clear manner was that there are parents who are involved. So let's break it down a little bit. Does the child have the right to consent for epidural? As of right now, without this law, no. Does the child have the right to be able to get pain medications during the labor and the labor pain? They do not have that right to get the consent. So that's the current law. Today, hopefully, we will be able to change this. But in many instances, that was a reason for my answer earlier, was the parents are right there, or a guardian is right there, they are able to give that consent. But not all parents and not all guardians are providing that consent, and therefore that it does not happen. Now, do we have data on all of these services at this time? No, but the clinicians who are providing this, they have seen enough of those, and as a result, they have actually asked many of us around this circle to be able to address this issue, and that's why this is in this bill. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Again, part of this problem with this conversation is the use of language. The good chairman considers it a right, and I don't. I mean, you don't have a right to any medical treatment, I mean, that is provided by another person, because you don't have a right to their labor. But what we're actually talking about is whether or not the minor child can authorize and give consent lawfully, is what we're saying. And I guess it's up in the air whether or not this is happening to a large degree or not. Would the, again, and I hate to put him on the spot again, but would the good chairman let me know whether or not this is happening in every case? Are minor children giving birth, first off, and then being denied pain medication in the process because they don't have a parent present? Is that actually happening, or is that just a fear that could happen through you?
Thank you, Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, Madam President, this is actually happening. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
All right, thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate that. Well, that's good to know. And I can understand the concern about that, because I do believe, I don't know if I'd go so far as my good friend and colleague, Senator Summers, to say it's barbaric, but I would say that, yeah, certainly we would want to make the patient as comfortable as possible in that particular case. Again, all of this could be solved using the mechanism I already described, which is a parental notification law that does have an outlet through a probate court that would allow a mechanism for the child to be able to give consent. This proposal that is before us really has two parts. I mentioned just before I started asking the good senator questions that this is kind of confusing because we're mixing up notification and consent kind of in a very difficult way to grasp. In my view, if you left this bill at just Section B with no Section C, we would achieve the stated goal of the proponents, which is to allow the minor child to give consent for services, examination, or treatment related to pregnancy and pregnancy prevention. Boom, done. Solves the problem. So I wonder why it is we're including Section C, which is this totally different concept, because now we're not talking about consent anymore. The consent problem is solved under that. If it was just there, I might have a tougher time voting for this bill anyway, simply because I don't believe we should be granting children the consent to be able to do a lot of these things, especially at age 13 or 14 years old. But at least that would make me understand the proponent's desire to make sure that that pain medication could be administered. But what I don't get is Section C, which is a whole different concept, which is basically no physician or other healthcare provider shall divulge any information. And presumably it only affects the pregnancy and pregnancy prevention, although that, as I mentioned before, that language is missing. So through you, Madam President, can I ask why the need is there to go so far to limit the notification when you've already solved the supposed problem, which is this failure for a child to consent to prenatal care and get that pain medication? Through you.
Thank you, Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, Madam President, this is about protection of confidentiality in this situation. And as I have shared some of the data earlier, there is a very significant difference in the use of services if there is no protection of confidentiality. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the gentleman's answer. Confidentiality. I don't know how much confidentiality I had when I was 13 or 14 years old. I think my parents kind of knew everything I did. Even the things that I didn't think that they knew I was hiding from them, I bet they knew. You know, I don't know that it's right for children to have confidentiality from their parents about their medical decisions when they're 13 or 14 years old. I guess that's what this whole question is about. You know, and what frustrates me is that we're disguising this idea of protecting children. Once again, it always comes back, we're going to protect children. Yeah, okay, that part of the bill I'm okay with, protect the children. So we're disguising the protect the children part, okay? That's already there with the consent to get the pain medication, which is what we are told over and over this bill is about. But it's also got this other piece in there which puts the state ahead of the parents in advising the child. because that's what Section C does. Section C basically takes the parents out of the equation, because what happens then is our existing law, which effectively puts the state responsible to guiding the child in their decisions. And for me, that's a frustration. I've been a strong advocate of parental notification, and I'll note, by the way, that there are a great many states across the country that require way more than notification. They actually require consent. You cannot do any of this. You cannot give birth control drugs to a minor girl or boy, if that happens, without parental consent. You cannot have an abortion without parental consent, and you can't have prenatal care without parental consent. That's the way it is across the country, except for a few exceptions. And yet, here it is, we are choosing to not only do away with consent, but we're also doing away with notification. Now, a lot of folks have come to me and said, well, gee, Rob, this doesn't change from the current law. And the fact is that in Connecticut, there is nothing that actually restricts notification other than the statute that says that the decision about terminating a pregnancy should be between the patient, even if that's a minor child, and the provider. I think it's a little bit different than saying we're going to put into statute no physician or healthcare provider shall divulge information. To me, that is an explicit prohibition on parental notification. And you can slice this bill any way you want, but at the end of the day, if you're voting yes on this bill, you are voting against parental notification. You are voting for a prohibition on parental notification for all those things, including a 13-year-old getting birth control medication. So, where to go from here? I wanted to say one last thing, I guess. And that is that I'm a strong advocate for parental notification, and that's for one reason. And that is, well, it's, I guess, more than two reasons. I'll give it two. One is because I do believe it's the parents' responsibility. They're the ones raising this child. They have a responsibility. Presumably this child lives under their roof. Presumably they are very involved in every aspect of this child's upbringing, from their education and their health. Teaching them what it means to become an adult. And I understand that there are exceptions in the world, and maybe they're legitimate exceptions, where there's a child that might have a legitimate and very real concern that involving these questions with their parent might cause a more significant problem. And I get that. And that's why I always include that provision that allows that escape hatch. But I also think that a lot of times when you're dealing with a young person, a young teenager, they might really believe that their best choice is to not involve their parent, when that's not true. I hope that sunk in. There are kids that are going to say, it's not in my best interest to involve that parent, but that's not true. That's just what a 14-year-old thinks when they're 14. That doesn't mean that that's true. And I'm worried that in many of these cases where the parent really should be involved, because that is the best solution, that is in the best interest of this child, that they're not going to be. Because we're writing laws that are making it so easy to replace the parents with the government. I don't ever want to replace the rights of parents to be involved in their children's lives with the government. That's the first reason. The second reason is that parental notification catches predators. That's the second reason why parental notification is a good thing. Because, sad to say it, there are some people that engage in activity that is illegal, immoral, and disgusting, frankly, and they impose themselves on young people in a way that might end up in a pregnancy. and therefore a pregnancy that becomes before a medical provider, and this decision has to be made. I would like very much for there to be a requirement that that child discloses what happened. I don't want to see Connecticut become a state where people bring their victims to have abortions. Because in Connecticut, it's very easy to get around any requirements for parental notification or getting to the bottom of what happened. Simply because the abuser can pressure the victim, a minor child, into simply consenting to the procedure without any parental involvement. I want to catch those abusers. I want to lock them up. So for me, this bill puts me in a quandary, because while I don't want to see anyone risk the potential of not getting the proper pain relief medication while giving birth, I suspect that's not a 100-case problem, and I think that there's ways to solve that without going through all of this. And as I mentioned, if we simply did Section B, not that I would necessarily agree with it, it would be a far better solution than Section C, which eliminates the rights of parents to know. That's all I have for you today, Madam President. I'm going to vote no on this policy before me because, as I said, I think there's just too many questions about whether or not this is good policy for the state of Connecticut. And I fear that is leaving parents out of the decision-making process for their own children at a very important and delicate developmental point in their lives. And I just can't abide that. So thank you.
The machine is open. Mr. Clerk, kindly announce the vote.
An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate. Voting on substitute for House Bill number 7213 as amended, an act concerning access to reproductive health care as amended by House Amendment Schedule A. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate. We're voting on the bill. This is House Bill number 7213, an act concerning access to reproductive health care. An immediate vote in the Senate.
Machine is locked. Mr. Clerk, give us the tally, please.
House Bill 7213 as amended. 36, total number voting 36, total number voting yea 31, total voting nay 5, absent not voting 0.
Legislation passes.